In the early hours of July 9, 1916, a pilot boat moved cautiously toward an unfamiliar shape outside the Virginia Capes. Its searchlight passed over a long, low hull, a narrow conning tower, and men standing on a deck barely above the water. This was not an American vessel. It had crossed the Atlantic from Germany while the Royal Navy was trying to cut Germany off from the outside world. The stranger identified herself with a single word: Deutschland. She was a submarine. But when American naval officers later searched her at Baltimore, they found no deck gun, no torpedo armament, and no naval crew. Her holds contained dyes, chemicals, medicines, mail, and commercial cargo. She had not come to attack American shipping. She had come to trade with it. For Germany, this was the central paradox of the vessel. Britain controlled the surface of the Atlantic, so German businessmen had built a merchant ship that could temporarily disappear beneath it. Deutschland had been created to preserve overseas commerce without firing a shot. Yet the empty deck that helped establish her as a merchant vessel would not remain empty for long. Within months, Germany's own submarine policy would destroy the neutral trading system on which Deutschland depended. The merchant captain would leave. Naval crews would take over. 2 large guns would be mounted above the same hull, and the commercial submarine Deutschland would enter the Imperial German Navy as U-155. Germany had built a submarine for trade. Then it chose a submarine campaign that made such trade impossible. When the First World War began in August 1914, Germany possessed one of the most powerful battle fleets in Europe. The ships of the High Seas Fleet had been built to challenge British naval supremacy in the North Sea. But battleships were only one part of maritime power. Germany also depended on merchant shipping that connected its factories, ports, and banks to distant suppliers. That commercial world began to collapse almost immediately. German merchant vessels already at sea sought safety in neutral ports or attempted to return home. Others were captured. Regular routes across the Atlantic disappeared. The Royal Navy did not need to anchor a battleship outside every German harbor. It established a distant blockade, guarding access to the North Sea and the English Channel while intercepting shipping farther away from Germany's coast. Neutral vessels could still sail, but Britain progressively widened the categories of goods it treated as contraband. Cargoes were examined, redirected, delayed, or seized if they were believed to be moving toward the Central Powers. The system was imperfect, politically controversial, and often frustrating to neutral countries. But it placed the world's most powerful navy between Germany and many of the materials its economy had once imported by sea. The problem was not that Germany had suddenly forgotten how to manufacture machinery. German industry could produce engines, weapons, electrical equipment, chemicals, and steel. The problem was that a modern industrial economy still required materials that could not simply be created inside a factory. Natural rubber was essential for tires, seals, insulation, hoses, and countless other military and industrial uses. Nickel was important in specialized alloys. Tin, copper, and other metals had to be obtained in sufficient quantities. Germany developed substitutes and searched for alternative sources, but substitution could not solve every shortage. An ordinary freighter could carry thousands of tons, but an ordinary freighter also had to remain visible. It could change its name, fly a neutral flag, sail at night, or take a longer route, yet it could not vanish when a patrol vessel appeared on the horizon. A surface blockade runner survived through speed, disguise, luck, or escort. Germany could not provide a battle fleet escort across the Atlantic without risking a confrontation it was unlikely to win. The requirement that produced Deutschland was therefore unusual. Germany did not initially need another vessel capable of fighting the Royal Navy. It needed a ship that could carry compact, valuable cargo to and from a neutral port while avoiding the Royal Navy altogether. The answer would sacrifice almost everything that made normal merchant shipping economical. It would carry only a small fraction of the cargo of a freighter. It would be expensive to build, difficult to operate, and restricted to goods valuable enough to justify the voyage. In return, it would possess one ability no surface merchant ship could match. When danger approached, it could dive. The principal commercial champion of this idea was Alfred Lohmann, a prominent businessman in Bremen. By 1915, Lohmann had concluded that the war would not end quickly and that Germany would continue to need overseas materials. He was not a submarine designer, and he was not an admiral attempting to create a new combat doctrine. His role was to recognize that the blockade had produced a commercial problem that might be solved by adapting a naval technology. Lohmann found support among institutions that understood both shipping and finance. Norddeutscher Lloyd had operated major passenger and cargo routes before the war. Deutsche Bank could help provide capital. Together, these interests supported the formation of the Deutsche Ozean-Reederei, the German ocean shipping company, established specifically to operate a submarine trading service. Deutschland's approved role was commercial. She would be registered and operated as a merchant vessel, commanded by a civilian captain and sent across the Atlantic carrying company cargo rather than naval weapons. The project was not based on the idea that submarine freight could replace all of Germany's lost shipping. That was impossible. The business case depended on choosing cargo by value and necessity rather than bulk. Dyes, pharmaceuticals, securities, mail, and other compact goods could be carried westward. Rubber, nickel, tin, and similar strategic materials could be brought back from the neutral United States. One voyage might transport hundreds of tons rather than thousands, but if the cargo was scarce, expensive, and important enough, the voyage could still be worthwhile. In October 1915, 2 merchant submarines were ordered. They would become Deutschland and Bremen. Their creation required a network of commercial sponsors, shipyards, and submarine specialists. Design work is credited to Hans Teckel and Rudolf Erbach. Construction was divided between Flensburger Schiffbau and Germania Werft in Kiel, turning the commercial requirement into a working ocean-going submarine. The ship that emerged from this network did not look like a normal freighter compressed into a smaller shape. Nor was it simply an ordinary combat U-boat with a few crates placed inside. It had been arranged around the requirements of freight. To understand the design, the first question was simple. Where could a submarine carry cargo? The pressure hull had to contain the crew, machinery, batteries, controls, and internal spaces that needed to remain dry at depth. Some freight went inside the protected pressure hull. Other cargo, particularly raw rubber on the return voyage, could be packed into spaces between the pressure hull and the outer casing. This produced an unusually wide vessel. The broad hull provided capacity, but capacity came with resistance. More surface area and a less streamlined form meant greater drag. Deutschland would never be fast. Her designers were accepting poor speed and difficult handling in exchange for storage, range, and the ability to submerge. The second question was how such a vessel could cross an ocean. Like other diesel-electric submarines of the period, Deutschland used diesel engines while traveling on the surface. There, the engines could propel the ship and recharge her batteries. Underwater, electric motors drew power from those batteries. This made submerged movement possible, but not unlimited. Deutschland was not intended to cross the Atlantic while remaining beneath the sea. Most of the voyage would be made on the surface, where range and speed were far greater. The vessel would dive near dangerous patrol zones when another ship approached too closely, or when remaining visible created an unacceptable risk. Submergence was not her normal traveling condition. It was her method of escape. The third question concerned weapons. Every gun, torpedo tube, shell room, and naval crewman would consume weight and space. More importantly, weapons would undermine the claim that Deutschland was a merchant vessel. Her lack of armament was not merely a technical omission, it was part of the commercial system itself. The ship would survive by concealment, not by defeating an attacker. If caught on the surface by a British warship, she could not fight her way free. Her safety depended on detecting danger early enough to dive, and on resurfacing only when the route appeared clear. Deutschland was launched on March 28, 1916. The speed of the project was remarkable, but rapid construction did not remove the need for trials. For approximately 6 weeks, the new submarine was tested and prepared for a voyage unlike any normal commercial crossing. Paul Koenig was selected to command her. Koenig had spent years with Norddeutscher Lloyd and held extensive experience as a merchant captain. During the war, he had also received naval and submarine training. He therefore occupied the narrow space between Deutschland's two worlds. He understood commercial navigation, but he also had to learn the handling, trim, ventilation, battery limits, and emergency procedures of a large submarine. During the final trials, Koenig worked with the technical team, including Rudolf Erbach. The vessel had to prove that it could dive under control, maintain depth, return safely to the surface, and endure the demands of a long voyage. Yet even successful trials could answer only the mechanical questions. They could not show whether Deutschland could avoid British patrols across the North Sea and Atlantic. They could not show whether a neutral country would accept a German submarine as a merchant ship. And they could not show whether the entire commercial idea could survive contact with wartime law and diplomacy. On June 14, 1916, Deutschland left the Weser with a civilian crew of 27. Her outward cargo included medicines, mail, and roughly 163 tons of aniline and coal tar dyes. These were valuable goods, but the greater purpose of the voyage lay in the return journey, somewhere beyond the British blockade where the materials Germany could no longer obtain through ordinary shipping. The route through the Dover Strait and English Channel was heavily defended, mined, and watched. Koenig therefore led Deutschland northward, passing around Scotland before turning into the open Atlantic. The image of a submarine secretly crossing an ocean invites exaggeration. Later stories imagined the vessel resting beneath the English Channel while British cruisers passed overhead, or traveling through an underwater world for days at a time. The reality was less fantastic and more revealing. Deutschland spent most of the crossing on the surface. The North Sea and the approaches to Britain were the most dangerous areas. There, another vessel on the horizon could force Koenig to alter course or submerge. Once in the Atlantic, distance itself became protection. The submarine could remain low in the water, difficult to identify at long range, and far from the patrol concentrations near Europe. The voyage still placed heavy demands on the crew. A broad cargo submarine did not offer the comfort of a passenger liner. When sealed for submerged movement, its machinery, batteries, men, food, and confined air occupied the same enclosed world. Ventilation could preserve life, but it could not turn the pressure hull into a normal ship. On the surface, heavy seas washed across the low deck and conning tower. Below, the crew lived among engines, electrical equipment, cargo boundaries, and the constant need to maintain trim. Koenig's task was not to remain hidden at all times. It was to decide when visibility was safe and when the vessel had to disappear. Nearly a month after leaving the Weser, Deutschland reached the Virginia Capes on July 9. The waiting tug and pilot guided her into Chesapeake Bay, and by the following morning she lay at Baltimore. Her arrival produced immediate attention. Newspapers treated the crossing as a technological and maritime sensation. American citizens came to see the vessel. German representatives celebrated what appeared to be a peaceful victory over British sea power. At a moment when the United States was still neutral, the submarine did not arrive as the image Americans had learned to fear after the destruction of passenger ships. Deutschland carried merchandise, and her crew appeared as civilian sailors. But public excitement could not settle her legal status. Britain and its allies had reason to object. A submarine could conceal its identity and movements more easily than a surface vessel. It could enter a neutral port without being observed along its entire route. Even an unarmed submarine might later be converted or supplied with weapons elsewhere. From the Allied perspective, the physical nature of the vessel made it different from an ordinary merchant ship. American authorities, therefore, had to determine what Deutschland actually was, not merely what Germany claimed her to be. 3 United States naval officers conducted a detailed inspection. They examined the vessel for weapons, torpedo equipment, and features that would establish her as a warship or an armed merchantman. Their conclusion was clear. They found no evidence that Deutschland was a man of war, and they believed she was correctly classed as part of the merchant marine. The American government accepted that judgment in this particular case. It also carefully avoided creating a universal precedent. The decision did not declare that every future submarine carrying cargo must be treated as a merchant vessel. It stated that the known circumstances of Deutschland gave the United States no reason to classify her as a warship. Her design had passed a test that could not have been completed in a shipyard. The empty deck, civilian crew, cargo arrangement, and lack of offensive equipment had created not only a functioning vessel, but a defensible legal identity. The Allies remained unconvinced. Their objection was larger than the presence or absence of a gun. A surface merchant ship could be watched, identified, stopped, and searched. A submarine possessed the ability to remove itself from observation. That ability, they argued, made normal rules difficult to apply. For Germany, the controversy only increased the propaganda value of the voyage. Deutschland had crossed the blockade without escort, reached a neutral port, and been accepted there as a merchant ship. The project appeared to have succeeded in engineering, navigation, and law. Now the hull was filled for the return journey. The cargo loaded at Baltimore included more than 800,000 pounds of crude rubber, over 750,000 pounds of nickel, and more than 180,000 pounds of tin. Together, the shipment approached 800 tons. Much of it was exactly the kind of material the blockade had made difficult for Germany to acquire. On August 2nd, Deutschland passed out through the Virginia Capes. She crossed the Atlantic again, avoided interception, and reached Germany on August 23. Crowds gathered along the Weser to welcome the vessel home. The first voyage had proved that the machine worked. The celebration, however, encouraged a conclusion the voyage itself could not support. Deutschland had shown that one submarine could penetrate the blockade. She had not shown that submarine freighters could restore Germany's overseas trade. The distinction was measured in cargo volume. Nearly 800 tons was a substantial load for a submarine, especially when the cargo consisted of scarce rubber and metals. It could supply specific industries, relieve particular shortages, and produce a large financial return. But a normal ocean-going freighter could carry many times that amount. A national economy at war consumed materials on a scale that no small group of submarine merchants could easily match. The project therefore required repetition. Deutschland would have to make repeated crossings. Bremen would have to succeed. Additional vessels would have to enter service. Neutral American ports would have to remain accessible. Losses would have to remain low enough that the enormous construction cost of each submarine could be justified. The first warning came from Deutschland's sister ship. Bremen departed on her first Atlantic voyage in 1916 and disappeared. Her precise fate was never established. She may have struck a mine, been rammed, or fallen to some other cause, but no firm explanation survived. The central fact was enough. A submarine could dive beneath a patrol line, yet it was not immune to the sea, mines, navigation errors, mechanical failure, or enemy action. Deutschland, nevertheless, prepared for a second voyage. This time Koenig sailed for New London, Connecticut. The vessel arrived on November 1st with another valuable outward cargo and began loading materials for Germany. Deutschland's reception at New London was cooler than Baltimore's. Only weeks earlier, U-155 had called at Newport and then sunk Allied merchant ships off Nantucket, reminding Americans how quickly a German submarine could move from a neutral port visit to commerce raiding. Deutschland's commercial identity still held, but it existed beside a growing diplomatic crisis created by other U-boats. The second voyage also produced a tragedy. On November 17, while beginning the return journey from New London, Deutschland collided with the escorting tug T.A. Scott Jr. The tug sank rapidly. Its captain and 4 crewmen were killed. The accident did not prove that the merchant submarine concept was unworkable, and contemporary accounts did not establish one simple cause. But it exposed how unforgiving a large, heavy submarine could be amid the strong currents and confined waters of the race. Deutschland returned to New London for repairs to her bow. She departed again on November 21 and completed the voyage to Germany. Koenig had now commanded 2 successful commercial round trips across the Atlantic. But the proposed system remained fragile. One of the first 2 merchant submarines had vanished. The surviving vessel had completed only 2 round trips. Its cargoes were useful, but too small to restore normal commerce. Each voyage depended on a neutral destination willing to admit the submarine, inspect it, load it, repair it, and allow it to depart. Deutschland's real vulnerability was not a British cruiser waiting outside Baltimore. It was the possibility that the United States would cease to be neutral. By the end of 1916, German leaders were again debating unrestricted submarine warfare. The military argument was powerful. Britain depended on maritime commerce for food, fuel, raw materials, and military supplies. German planners believed that a sufficiently intense U-boat campaign might sink shipping faster than Britain and its allies could replace it. If British imports collapsed quickly enough, Germany might force a decision before the United States could intervene effectively. The danger was equally clear. Attacking ships without warning and without guaranteeing the safety of passengers and crews risked bringing the United States into the war. Deutschland's entire commercial career existed inside that diplomatic tension. Her merchant status depended on a visible distinction between a civilian freight vessel and the German submarines attacking trade. Her American route depended on the United States remaining outside the war. Her unarmed configuration made sense only while German policy still allowed commerce with a neutral country to continue. On January 31, 1917, Germany informed the United States that unrestricted submarine warfare would resume. The new campaign began on February 1st. 2 days later, the United States broke diplomatic relations with Germany. The neutral route that had given Deutschland a purpose was collapsing. On February 19, weeks before the United States formally declared war, Deutschland entered the Imperial German Navy as U-155. The timing matters. America's declaration of war did not first cause the conversion. Germany's decision to resume unrestricted submarine warfare had already made continued merchant voyages increasingly impossible and had destroyed the political separation on which the project depended. The transfer also ended Paul Koenig's command of the vessel. He had taken Deutschland through her trials and across the Atlantic twice as a merchant captain. U-155 would now sail under naval commanders with a naval crew. The transformation was visible above the waterline. 2 15-centimeter guns were mounted on the deck, and bow torpedo tubes were added. Spaces that had carried commercial freight could now support fuel, ammunition, torpedoes, provisions, and the stores required for long patrols. Yet conversion could not erase the design decisions made in 1915. The Navy could install weapons on Deutschland's deck, but it could not remove the broad cargo hull beneath them. The large internal volume and long range offered clear military advantages. U-155 could remain at sea for extended periods and operate far from German bases. It could carry enough supplies to function as a submarine cruiser rather than a short-range coastal boat. The costs remained equally clear. The vessel had not been shaped for high speed, rapid diving, or underwater maneuverability. Her width and displacement produced drag. Her size made her slow and cumbersome. The commercial design had treated submergence as temporary protection. A combat submarine might need to dive quickly while under attack, change depth precisely, evade patrol vessels, and maneuver against an enemy that was actively hunting it. Adding guns changed what the ship carried. It did not change why the hull had been shaped that way. U-155 began her naval career under Karl Musil. Her first major war patrol started in May 1917. She passed around the British Isles, moved into the Atlantic, and cruised toward the Azores and distant shipping routes. This was where the commercial design revealed its greatest military strength. U-155 could remain at sea for months. Her first long patrol lasted 105 days and covered more than 10,000 miles. Only a portion of that distance was traveled submerged. Like Deutschland, The converted vessel still depended on surface operation for range and speed. Against merchant ships, the large deck guns were useful. Torpedoes were limited and valuable. A submarine cruiser that could stop or overwhelm a merchant vessel with gunfire could preserve its torpedoes for targets or situations where they were necessary. The hull that once carried rubber and nickel now carried the ammunition required for a prolonged campaign against maritime commerce. But endurance was not the same as tactical excellence. Contemporary and later assessments described U-155 as slow, clumsy, and poor when submerged. These were not accidental flaws added during conversion. They were the consequences of a merchant submarine being asked to perform as a warship. The broad hull that had created cargo capacity imposed a continuing penalty every time the boat had to turn, dive, or escape. U-155 was therefore neither a useless warship nor an ideal one. Across 3 patrols, current records credit her with sinking 43 ships, totaling more than 120,000 gross registered tons, and damaging 3 more. Those results were substantial. They proved that the converted vessel could operate at great range and inflict losses on Allied commerce. They did not prove that the original merchant hull had become a perfectly balanced combat submarine. Its military value came from the same characteristics that had once made commercial service possible: capacity and endurance. Its military weakness came from the same bargain: size, drag, and limited underwater performance. The conversion did not reverse Deutschland's design, it repurposed it. Deutschland had been built to move German goods through a blockade without attacking anyone. As U-155, the same hull was converted to attack the shipping system supporting Germany's enemies. The first role depended on American neutrality. The unrestricted warfare policy behind the second had already made that neutrality untenable. The commercial route and the unrestricted submarine campaign could not coexist. The policy that produced U-155 had erased the neutral system built around Deutschland. Deutsche Ozean-Reederei no longer possessed a viable route to operate. The vessel designed by Hans Teckel and Rudolf Erbach remained useful, but only after its original purpose had been discarded. Paul Koenig's 2 peaceful crossings became the prehistory of a naval career commanded by other men. The armistice came while U-155 was completing her final operations. She returned to Kiel in mid-November and surrendered to the British at Harwich on November 24, 1918. She was later exhibited in London and Liverpool before being broken up. That post-war display provided a final reversal. In Baltimore, American officers had entered Deutschland searching for evidence that she was a warship. They had found an unarmed merchant submarine carrying cargo. The absence of guns had helped define the vessel's identity and allowed her to use a neutral port. After the war, British crowds could see the same hull with the weapons added during its second life. Deutschland had shown that a submarine could carry trade beneath a blockade. She had crossed the Atlantic twice, delivered valuable cargo, and completed the missions for which she was built. But her small capacity could not replace Germany's lost surface commerce, and the system depended on diplomatic restraint that Germany's leaders abandoned. U-155 preserved the vessel, but not the idea. The cargo spaces became military stores. The civilian crew gave way to naval personnel. The empty deck became a gun platform. Only one hull was needed to reveal the contradiction.